Okay. Hey, global supply chainers, and welcome to our second live event of Supply Chain Dynamics SE3X, the fourth course in our course series. This is definitely the latter half of the course if you're taking it in sequential series. So we're really excited today, and thank you guys so much for joining. I think we have a really exciting live event today. We have Dr. Manny Janakaram from Intel joining us today. So I'm going to introduce him in just 1 minute, but I'm going to start with a few course updates and just to sort of level set where we are with the course. And then I will introduce him and we will jump right into an interview with him to really get some experience and insight from his wealth of experience. And then at the end, you guys will have a chance to ask him questions. So you'll actually funnel that through the chat and we will ask him. So as you're listening to our discussion, start jotting down your questions, and so that you'll be prepared to get that opportunity to ask him questions. So the SE3X is we're sitting at about 6,700 students from around the world. So a good population of students there. 546 of you guys are verified, which are who is joining today. This is a verified only event. So if you guys are here, then you're taking advantage of that benefit, which we are really happy for. Median age is about 30, so that's and then the range can be anywhere from 16 to 70 is what I saw. So we got people all over the board taking this course. 153 countries are represented, and the top 3 countries are the United States, India, and Brazil, making up the majority. But it's a truly global population, as we are already seeing in this live event. You guys are coming from everywhere, so we're so happy to have you. So I should have actually introduced myself to start. You guys you did not meet me in the last live event. Maybe some of you guys are familiar with me. I'm definitely the person that sends you emails every Tuesday, so you may or may not be sick of my name, but I'm Dr. Alexis Bateman. I'm a research scientist here at the center and working on the MicroMasters team. And I'm your course lead, obviously. So then I've been sort of the person behind the scenes on the course, but now excited to meet you more in person. Few quick reminders before we jump in with Manny. We have the midterm coming up, opening on February 14th. So what better way to spend your Valentine's Day than taking a midterm for this course? And obviously I'm joking about that, but that will be 1 week as we have done. And for those of you guys have taken other courses in the past, you know that it will be open 1 week, but once you start it, you'll only have 4 hours to complete it. So just make sure that you set aside a 4-hour time block. We don't expect it to take all 4 hours. It should take about 2, but just make sure you have that time blocked within that week. And so that will be open from February 14th to 21st. And that will cover really the first 4 weeks of the course as we've been through. So as we talked about in week 1, complexity and dealing with complexity through process management, then system dynamics, looking at the entire system of supply chains and other approaches to map out dynamics within the supply chain. And then in week 3, we tackled bullwhip effect and supply contracts and really customer collaboration and supplier collaboration there. And in this most recent week, supply chain strategy. So it'll cover all 4 weeks equally, and you'll have an opportunity to answer different types of questions, and they will be similar to the ones you've seen in the graded assignments, but not exactly the same. So make sure to start reviewing now. This is sort of your prep week to start doing that, and that will open next Wednesday. Final note before we get in the interview is that we have that in week 4, we have the open response with peer review graded assignment. And, as as it said in that's a new type of problem. So you guys may or may have not seen it before. We ran it for practice a couple times, so it may be new to many of you. But to get full credit for it, you have to not only submit your own answer, which is due next Wednesday, February 14th, but you also have to assess 3 of your peers. And so that's pretty explicit in the instructions. So if you have not yet assessed your peers, you need to do that within the week after the close. So anytime now before February 21st. So those were just some quick notes for the course, but now we'll get into the good stuff. Those were not the real exciting stuff, but good to check in. So today we're super lucky to host Dr. Manny Janakiram. He's been with Intel for 19 years, so he has some significant experience with that company and across supply chain. So he's managed strategic projects in anything from factory operations, capacity planning, process control, analytics strategy, supplier management, IoT, factory science, and supply chain. So he has really done it all. So we really get a great wealth of experience by chatting with him today. And not only 19 years in Intel, but he's been in supply chain for 25 years. So he's really worked, not only in Intel's and electronics industry, but also automotive and aerospace industry. And he also worked at Honeywell and Motorola in other areas, including operations, strategy, analytics, and more. So we are really lucky to have Manny today. So I'm going to give him a few moments to introduce himself, and then he's going to give you a little bit of overview about supply chain at Intel, and then we'll dive into the questions. Thanks, Manny, for joining today.
Thanks, Alexis, for the opportunity. Good morning, and of course, good evening to some of you on the line. And today, I would like to talk about where the Intel supply chain is going in terms of how it is supporting Intel's overall strategy, and what are the things that we have done well, and what are the opportunities and challenges that we're going to be addressing. And given that I am more into the analytics and strategy, I probably will lean on various aspects of supply chain analytics as well. And as we go through that, as Dr. Alexis was indicating, we will field questions. And the intent really is more on the conversation side. And I do have a few slides just so that it gives a better flavor of what we're doing. I would like to start with where we are, what Intel is doing. Most of you probably, I hope most of you know Intel, and the Intel has been known as a PC company for several years, but over the several, past several years, we are going through a huge transformation ourselves. We would like to recognize Intel as a company where the world runs on Intel. It's not just a PC company, but it is a compute. In fact, our vision, as you can see on the slide that we're going to be sharing on the first slide is, like anything that is smart and that, that computes, we'd like to have it run on Intel. And again, looking at where the industry, where our markets are, we are primarily like big on the server industry. We also have a lot of accelerant technologies like Internet of Things, FPGA, and so, like several other products that go along with it, like 5G that we're working on from communication perspective. And the overall goal is how do we provide the best compute experience to the world community. And but technically, when you look at it, Intel is built on our foundation is built on what we call as the Moore's law. It's more of an economic than a technical kind of an approach where Gordon Moore, our ex-CEO, several years ago on a napkin just indicated that the transistors will double every, 18 months, and the cost of the transistor will come down while the size of the transistor would be reducing, as well. And how do we cope up with it? The fact that now we have PCs that are really slim, now that we have the mobile and other products that are really mini, like a small sizes, attributed to the fact that we are kind of following the Moore's law, and the industry is kind of leveraging it from many aspects. And this is what we call as the virtuous cycle, because the customers are asking for more. The technology is enhancing, as you can see. Like we can have gigabytes of data on a small SSD, versus how do we move the data faster. All those things are transforming quite well. So as we progress along this path, the challenge for us is how do we keep up with technology, through the supply chain. And the question that always comes up is, what does supply chain do for an industry such as electronic industry such as Intel? when you look at it, we really have to start with the business strategy, like where we want to go, what are the things we want to do, like a $62 billion company, 100,000 employees. I mean, more than 40% are technical, a lot of PhDs. And how does a supply chain that can support a varying product portfolio is something that we have to look at it. Uh, One of the things that you may want to notice is Intel does not necessarily have hundreds of thousands of SKUs like Walmart or Amazon has, but we do have complexity that comes from technology, that also comes from varied application of our manufacturing processes. For example, some of the things you're working on, we don't even know there is a metal or a material that exists today, but we have to plan for a next 10 to 15 years out. And when the market is shifting, when the technology is changing, when the people's sentiments are different, how do you plan for like a product that's going to be 10 years out? And not only plan for it, how is it going to be transforming from where we are? And what are the different pieces that go into it? The components, the supply chain is where that starts. The sourcing and like the intelligence comes into picture. What are the things we should be looking? Should I build a fab, which is upwards of $5 billion today? How am I going to plan for it? It's going to take 2 years. How do I know the market is not going to change when we get there? Those are all the complexities that we deal with. uh, and there are several other aspects, but like when we look at our supply chain, on a particular slide, I indicated there are four pillars. One is the technology aspect I've been talking about. The other one is the manufacturing scale. For example, we start out with a wafer, like as big as your dinner plate, and then we make uh, hundreds of thousands, depending on the size, the transistors and the chips out of that. So that means we start with one wafer, it ends up branching into many of chips, and then we have to put them together. So what we call as the fan in, fan out kind of a concept is what we do. And it goes through hundreds of miles within a fab before it, like it transfers from a wafer into a product. And there is a criticality around how we process it, the tools that we use, the litho, for example, it could be anywhere from $40 million to $100 million per tool. So how do we plan for it? How do we make sure we get the line balance? How do we get the capacity? How do we ensure that the demand and supply are aligned? Are some of the challenges we have to look at. How do we ensure the ecosystem is working with us? What are the risks we have to take? Are some of the things we really look at? I'm going to stop here, Alexis, and see if there are any comments or questions.
Yeah, that is already kind of perfectly aligned with the first 4 weeks of the course, and I think that you guys can already see the scale of Intel that is absolutely you know, a perfect example of the complexity that that we've been talking about for the first couple weeks. So I think this is great overview. Why don't you continue with a few more of your slides, and then we'll jump right into our interview, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Perfect. I think a couple of things I would like to point out on my slide are, like some of the things I mentioned earlier, but critically going into where exactly are the challenges that are coming from, and how do we measure our supply chain success? We have internal measures which are very much aligned with the industry standards. For example, Gartner has a supply chain metrics, and as well as the Apex have the score metrics. But it comes down to how well we are serving our customers. So most all our metrics, like whether it is external facing or internal facing, is measured around how well our products and services are enabling our customer and supporting and servicing them. Internally, we look at supply chain cost. That is very critical. When I talk about our particularly factories are $4 billion plus, the emphasis on asset utilization is critical. Like how do we leverage that? And then velocity is another big deal for us, what we call as the availability and velocity. How quickly can we get the product out, particularly if it is time to market? Some of our processes could be months before when we start a wafer and it ends up in our warehouse, it could be months before that happens, depending on the technology. And then the technology, as I mentioned, is another big one. How quickly we are ramping, what are the different challenges we have to address, how do we ensure the quality issues are addressed, and not to mention another big thing we look at is sustainability. Sustainability could be in the form of materials, could be corporate social responsibility. I'm sure some of you heard about our conflict-free mineral program, where our goal is to ensure our transistors are 100% conflict free. And we started out with 4 minerals in the Republic of Congo, and even though we are, like consuming the minerals and materials, we have like connections and audit trail all the way into smelters and minerals, into the mining, to really make sure that there is no, like a child labor, for example. We're also looking at several aspects of conflict in terms of bonded labor, in terms of like what we are starting to look at as slavery in supply chain, and also from a sustainable material perspective, are we using the right chemicals, and how do we, like what are the disposition techniques, and how we are socially responsible from a footprint perspective. So those are all the elements that we really take into consideration. And then I think one more slide I'm going to talk, and then before you pass for questions, is how do we do this in this complex world? Definitely we have to have good business, and like a process, and we have to have the right people who understand and value and agree with the culture and enhance the culture we have. And then of course leveraging the people process tools, data and systems. And that's where, like we emphasize and focus on, data by itself is not enough. How do we create systems and tools and algorithms that can take this data and convert it into useful insight, like a real time? And that's where, we focus on some of the intelligence platforms, whether it is a cognitive computing, or it could be as basic as understanding our entire supply network, and then looking at what we can do differently, how we can, like connect and integrate the systems, are some of the things we strive to do at Intel. So, Alexis, I'm going to stop here now and see if you have any comments
Perfect.
or adds.
Great. Yes. So now I think so. That was a perfect overview of the Intel supply chain and some of the challenges that you grapple with. Which I mean, it couldn't align more closely with what we're learning in this course, which is pretty much all the factors that are impacting supply chain and how do we prepare for those factors. So I have a few questions on my own personally because I want to, the questions are already rolling in from the students. So I'm just going to ask you a handful of questions for the next 15 or 20 minutes, and then we're going to go right into a student questions because there's already some wonderful questions rolling in. So just to kind of give, since these are future global supply chain professionals, just to give them a sense, I wanted to see, how did you come to global supply chain management or supply chain management in general? Was this something you knew, from the beginning you wanted to do, or, was it sort of just a natural evolution from your roles, or how really did you get into it?
That's a great question. When I started out as a mechanical engineer and more into the materials, and then my master's was more into industrial systems, operation research. That's where I started getting more exposure to operational and supply chain kind of activities. And it also made it, like it was very clear that as a technologist, yes, I can make a lot of impact. I can, like working on some of the composite materials and things like that. But when it came down to how do we make sure that, like how blending of business and technology and all the other elements to make, like make an impact technically, at the same time make a huge business impact. How do we
Sure.
make that happen? That is where, when you look at it, that's why I was mentioning a company. When the company mission vision happens, and then the next is the business strategy. Initially, supply chain used to be, many years ago, more of a cost centric kind of a focus.
Hmm.
Go get this done, get the material, move the
Absolutely.
product, like transport it, and then make sure the customers are happy. But now when you start putting it all together, the next thing, like when you look at the business strategy, the next thing that comes up is supply chain strategy. And no wonder that some of the big companies, including Intel as well as Apple, if you look at the CEOs, they were not necessarily technical professionals, but they also had a heavy dose of operations and supply chain. Tim
Hmm.
Cook and our CEO, BK was COO, and the supply chain was reporting to him. So there is a clear requirement that you understand your business, you run your business through efficient and effective supply chain, so that we not only hit the bottom line, but also look at how do we enhance revenue. Because if you're looking at a new product and service, how do you scale it? How do you make it flexible? What are the challenges? How do you ensure the customer connections are happen? I think supply chain plays a key role. I came to that realization when I was doing my master's. And also, it is a combination of being at the right place at the right time, and also the
Sure.
interest and inclination to do that kind of took me from more of a material manufacturing, a mechanical engineer, to a supply chain professional. And also, kind of along the way, I looked at what are the things that cut across. For example, analytics, strategy, and some of the other, modeling. Those things, no matter where you go, they are tools in your toolbox. And if you apply
Yes.
them right, you can actually make a difference across the board. And that is one of the
Right.
things I kind of got, like gathered along the way and started learning the business. Because if you don't understand the business, if you don't walk in the steps of the people who are doing it, you're not going to be relevant. So I may be the best data scientist, but if I don't understand how the warehouse operates, how the planning works, I probably won't fit in, or they won't have the confidence in me. That is where the supply chain functions are critical. And like you and my team, we make sure that we understand the business first. We work with the
Hmm.
partners right, and then we apply the solutions, understanding what questions we're trying to solve, why we're solving, why it matters from the both strategic as well as pain point perspective, and then we look at what solutions we can apply.
Right. No, that's perfect. That's great kind of overview. And obviously, thinking about the supply chain is sort of the key, component here, bringing together so many facets within the company. I mean, this is exactly what we like to view supply chain as what the students are learning right now. So that's great. Thank you so much. The next kind of question would be, and you touched about this a little bit, which is sort of supply chain used to be the, go do this and kind of the taskmaster. What do you think? How do you think the supply chain management role has really changed over the last 20 years? And you touched on this a little bit, but other thoughts on that?
So it is supply chain roles are transforming as we speak also. And initially, many years ago, supply chain, as I indicated, was an afterthought, right? We need to
Right.
make sure the cost function, like the cost is kept low, and make sure that you have the best negotiation and procurement policies in place. And also, it was more like like individual functions. The procurement and sourcing would be, like a separate function, and then they would have a planning that would be more associated with the manufacturing function, and then the network and distribution was where more of a customer focusing. So they were separate and isolated. But what is happening today is they're coming together. In fact, I would like to mention Gartner has a what they call as a five-stage maturity model for supply
Sure.
chain. And they start out with, the stage one companies. They're not, like they're extremely silo, very functional. But when you start progressing as a supply chain leader, you start learning and understanding what matters most, that to have the right metrics. Am I integrated well to have an internal, external view? Am I focusing and, like, am I demand driven versus, like just supporting the cost functions? And that's where the integration function is come in. In fact, many companies have a role called chief supply chain officer now. The
Right.
function of chief supply is, it's a C-suite, and the person actually, he or she, like basically manages supply chain across the board, working with the business units to understand the business strategy, influencing them. We have design for supply chain that kind of formed into the integrated view, and now we are looking at what products and services are going to be critical, because we have insight not only into what is happening inside, but also into outside. So it is transforming into a critical role, not just at this, at the functional level, but integration is happening. And one trick pony is not going to work anymore. Like if you are extremely good in planning, that's great. I mean, you will have a great career, but if you want to advance, you really need to understand, what is the business requirement? What are the things that I should do better? How do I integrate my functions? Can I upskill myself? Are some of the things we have to look at.
Right. Oh, that's great. That's a great kind of overview of the last, how it's changed. So that I feel that you're the perfect person to talk to that since you've really watched it over the last 20 years. So I have a couple questions on complexity and strategy, but I think we've actually touched on that. And then I'm also seeing sort of some questions in the chat room on a different line. So I'm going to ask you a few of questions about one thing that obviously you touched on a little bit, but we could get in a little bit more. Were what are the risks you really grapple with in the supply chain? And I know this is true on sort of both the regulatory side and material risk, but just what are the type of risks and how do you identify those risks?
Great question, Alexis. Supply chain risk has been a big challenge for us, for everybody, right? I mean, it is sometimes a fear of the unknown because the natural disasters that we have gone through over the several years, right? I mean, the Japan, the earthquake, and also in the Iceland several years ago when we have to basically cannot fly because of the smog and smoke. The question is, like we primarily look at what's our network look like, where the customers are, where the suppliers are, and how good is our business continuity process. And so those are some of the supply chain risks assessment we make, and then we look at what like there are a lot of what if scenarios. What if we have a situation where there is it could be political, it could be natural, it could be like anything else, right? So we are looking at it, and there are some of the things that we can plan for, some of the things we probably have to react. So the whole idea is how can we reduce the react and increase the proactive part of our supply chain risk thinking. These some of the things we
Yeah.
have a very good system in place. Most of the companies do in terms of when certain event happens, how do we manage and mitigate the process? And of course, it comes from people safety as well as product and customer. So we have to take all those into consideration. And examples would be when we have like when uh, like in Japan when we had the earthquake and the tsunami, we were really looking at like our people safe, immediate communication and connections and contact, and then is our customer services, everything. What are the things that we have to do to support, ensure like minimal if not no impact, and then how do we ensure that we like our um, uh, suppliers, if they're impacted, how do we ensure that we support them? And because it's a partnership end of the day. So those are some of the things we have in place. We have various tools and systems, we have monitoring capabilities, and we also are building some cognitive based proactive systems where we have
Right.
unstructured data coming in. We're looking at blocks and we're looking at sentiments to understand, are there any issues? Again, the risk could be financial. Like, for example, working with this particular supplier and the supplier may not be financially doing well. We don't want to hear that after the fact. We want to be monitoring and knowing, and also like maybe a supplier is getting merged with another company, so M&A activities, we want to be in the know before it happens.
Right. No, absolutely. That was great summary, and definitely very interesting on how you guys deal with risks, and there's so many and so diverse. So I would like to be selfish and continue to ask you my questions because I want to know more, but we are getting so many questions, great questions from the students. So I'm actually just going to jump to their questions if you're okay with that, and it won't be really topic oriented. We're just going to kind of fly by the seat of our pants right now, and then if I get a chance, I'll come back to my questions at the end. But I suspect with the wealth of questions we have coming in right now, we will be busy for the rest of the hour. So let me just pull some questions from our students. So Saravanan G asks, can you elaborate more about the impact of Industry 4.0 on supply chains?
Great question. Like if you look at it, the industry 1.0, 2.0, it has been a long, but very meaningful and effective journey. Like we go back to the role of steam engines and then electric, go back all the way, and then kind of not necessarily going through the sequence, but by 2000 we had the internet, and before that the PC and the compute era automation, and the 4.0 is really about how do we handle harness the data and the cyber, like what we call as the cyber systems, right? And it's a combination of ingesting smart system data maybe it's an IoT through various channels. Like the communication channel need to be big, huge, because the 4G, for example, is still limited in terms of how we transfer data. It's not only the volume, it is also the way we do that. We have to, but the 5G is going to transform some of those. So the IoT systems that become smart machines and smart systems will not only be able to sense and respond, but they'll be able to communicate. And that would provide, it's not just a client, like a server, but it also a peer-to-peer kind of communication. When we take all those information together, when we put them together, we have a better CPU, better GPU, we have a good memory, and we have good communication, and then we have edge compute with analytics. When we put all those things together, and also advent of augmented reality and virtual reality, you can actually design and plan and look at what ifs right, as if you are in there. And when you do all these things in near real time, the data explosion being handled quite well, it is going to revolutionize the industry. It is doing that already. The example is the autonomous vehicle. Yes, like it is still evolving, ways to go, but a classic example of a technology that is leveraging all these things we talked about could be autonomous vehicle, where it has to have a good eco sensing, it has to have intelligence, it has to have transforming data into insight real time. I'm not even talking near real time, I'm talking real time. And not only that, it has to proactively sense and scan and respond in terms of, okay, where I want to go, how I want to do it, who is going to be in my way. I mean, all those things need to be worked out. And this is where the industry is going. From an industry perspective, we are going to be having, we already have smart machines, but imagine machines talking to each other. From a supply chain perspective, we look at a machine that not only understand its role in the in the overall scheme of things. What are the things I can process? Who are my fellow machines that can do the same thing? When the load comes in, like what are the quality issues I can deal with? And by the way, the PM is going to happen, preventative maintenance. I'm scheduled for it in 3 months. I need to have technicians. I need to have this tech, this kind of a, components, and I need to connect with the supply chain system to autonomously, we're not there yet, but to autonomously order those. And also to make sure that, like it is virtually done, like GE has what's called as the virtual twins.
Mhm.
So looking at what are the different things if I'm developing a new product. I think that it's a very interesting era of, bringing all this technology together, robotics, robots working with humans, and autonomous activities going on, and the shared economy. All those things are coming together in a very nice um, industry 4.0, I would say.
Great. No, it's super interesting. It brings together a lot of the topics, and this is connected, but on a different vein. We'll talk about sustainability later in the course in week 10, and I know Intel is really quite active in this place. But Gleb Gleb wants to know, how do you control the use of conflict minerals in your supply chain, and then added onto that, is blockchain possibly on the horizon for conflict mineral management?
Great question. How do we manage conflict-free minerals? I think we have a very vast program. Step number one for us, this goes back to almost 8, 10 years now. We have to recognize the problem and declare that as a goal, which we did. Our CEO did that, and COO was supporting, doing that as well. And the next question is mapping out our entire supply chain. Where are all the, when I'm getting a tungsten, titanium, gold, a particular metal that's coming from, what does the life cycle of that mineral look like? Where is it starting? Where is it coming? And how is it ending? And in a sustainability perspective, I need to look at the entire life cycle from, concept to, basically to the end of where it is, like either recycled or so. In that perspective, we mapped it out. We looked at different locations where it's coming from, and then we also look kind of started to identify the geopolitical kind of issues. And if it is coming from a particular mine, I mentioned Republic of Congo, primarily where we have to go audit. We had our people go in and audit, and we also worked with the industry to create a consortium, what we call as the EICC, and we worked with them to really kind of spread the word and leverage partnering with others so that it is not just Intel, but it is industry wide. So putting that in place, having the auditors in place, working with our multiple supply chain network. It is not supplier, and making sure that we have various checks and balances in place is how we were able to establish that. And the other question was blockchain. Well, definitely blockchain is coming up, and in fact what I hear also is electronic data transfer, virtual asset movement. All those things are going to be leveraging blockchain. It is upcoming, like Bitcoin, and now it is blockchain. For supply chain, it is actually very relevant because it is a network. When we look at the way the blockchain operates, node to node in a very hybrid fashion, it is definitely something that we have in mind. We have projects along the way looking at blockchain application for, not only conflict-free mineral, but also for product transfer. Like
Mm,
in logistics, also
sure.
looking at how do we even make our contracts smart contracts. Like I was mentioning about the equipment, if I have a blockchain that understands the entire process and also like able to work with the private, public, like a kind of a blockchain. How do we move our assets? How do we engage different entities, and how do we get the asset delivery done? We are working on it. We have some solutions. Intel also has a like a lot of activities going on in ensuring the technology can handle, because you can imagine the scale, the explosion of the scale, the connection points with blockchain. So we have our own, like Sawtooth Bridge, that is primarily a technology that we are trying to make it work with our, like components and our compute capabilities as well.
Great, great. Thanks. And that was perfect actually, because we had additional questions on blockchain applications at Intel in general. So it was a great overview. And obviously, we know it's a hot topic right now. I can't make it through this conversation without talking about blockchain a little bit right now. Great, that's great. So actually, Fabricio is going back to something you talked about in your presentation, and he said, in this assemble to order scenario that you explained, how critical is it that how critical is the raw material buffer and forecasting? Some unpredictable things can obviously happen. How do you provide a responsive change?
Oh, that's a great question, because I think probably, like is referring to our various supply chains and the
Yes.
complexity that is coming from going from a PC centric to a compute capable, like supporting most of the other products and services. So our supply chain is not just, within the Intel facility. Of course, we have several fabs and assembly sites worldwide, but we are also becoming more, getting into a lot more of outsourced manufacturing. And also that means the product comes in, goes out, the network gets complicated, we have to handle that. And assemble to order is the question that was asked. We have specifically, when we look at our processes, we can break it into two big process. One is the front end process. That's where the wafer, is processed to, to make the chip. And then assembly process where we test them and then we encapsulate them. That's where it becomes the final product. The wafer process is quite long, I mean months, because it's like we go through hundreds of layers, if you will. It's almost like, for people who are not familiar with the semiconductor process, it's like we build it from one layer on top of the other, and a lot of chemicals and minerals and like they get added, they get subtracted. We have the oxide layers, and so that is a month process. And then once it is formed, in the assembly process happens. In order to ensure that we have the right inventory and right buffering, we like we have worked on various, like not just the forecasting, combining with the demand and supply. We also have inventory strategy across the entire supply chain. We have supply chain visibility across our product line to understand where and how things are moving. We have the right metrics like days of inventory, safety stock at critical points. We have embedded, constraint theory, and we know where, given that assets are critical, where and how we need to ensure we get the best utilization. So based on that, we have different policies, and we also have at critical junctures what we call as a wafer bank and also a die bank. So in assemble to order, we have critical die banks, and then we leverage the combination of push and pull to ensure that like we are not building more to ensure that there is no inventory obsolescence. At the same time, we don't get into a situation where it is a stock out scenario. So a lot of analytical, like processes are embedded into our enterprise systems. The algorithms actually on a real-time basis, we compute our inventory. We actually take stock of what's coming in. We have a very complicated, very large optimization engine that looks at a daily, like shiftly. We have the capability to go, like hourly, but we want to make sure that it makes sense. So we have a regular cadence. We run the supply chain optimization, and we based on that we do the allocations and like our inventory planning across the factory.
Great, great. No, and so actually linked to that question, coming back to how your different supply chains and how you run them, how do you define metrics for success? Do you develop them from the perspective of the customer? This is coming from Edame, and he wants to know, is it from the perspective of the customer? What is critical for them? And do you have customer collaboration platforms?
Great question. I think we have both like customer facing and also internal facing metrics, but our goal is to ensure our customers get what they want. In fact, many years ago, several years ago, it's almost 8 years ago, we ran into a situation where there were some concerns around, are we providing what the customer want? So we started a campaign called Say Yes to Customer. And primarily, what it means is if the customer wants a particular product or a service, we're going to say yes. And then we're going to go figure out how we do this, whether it is in terms of volume, in terms of type, in terms of timing. We started that, and then we also evolved from there in terms of what are the metrics we have. How many, like for example, we have a perfect order. That is a customer facing metric. And then we have order fulfillment lead time. That is also customer facing. And those are two critical. And then we also do customer satisfaction. In fact, third party assessment of how well we are serving the customer. What are the critical functions we need to serve? It is not just about the bragging rights, because we always get more than 90% satisfaction. One of the best in the industry is what we hear in the semiconductor space. But also it is about learning from where we can do better, and then how it links to our next product and service. If you're doing well in a particular like portfolio, how can we transfer that to another portfolio?
Sure.
And then internally, we are looking at supply chain cost as a function of revenue. So that kind of puts checks and balances. Asset utilization is another big one. And inventory, like turns is another big one. So we have all those metrics that we monitor closely.
Great, great. Thanks. That was a good insight on how that's connected. One question from Param is, so we talked in our course, we talk about system dynamics and systems modeling, and his question is basically, how do you guys model systems and get systems perspective? We teach a certain set of tools, and so he just wants to kind of level set on that and see, as a company like Intel, how do you really get a good perspective on, your supply chain system?
That's great. In fact, if you can go to the slide that primarily talks to like there is a IoT slide actually. In fact, it's a visibility slide. Uh,
Okay.
I'm
Let's see
thinking
if,
it's probably a couple of slides over where it talks about visibility, and
okay. Let's see if Arthur can,
and
Arthur, can you populate the visibility slide on there?
I can tell you slide number.
Okay. We will get it up there in just 1 second.
Sure. I think the slide number, I believe it is slide number 11, for example.
Okay. Okay. Great. Oh, there
So
it
what
is.
we're trying to
Okay.
do here is, like the question is, how do you understand the complexity of the supply chain so that you can model it? And understand what metrics you want to measure and things like that. We have various approaches to it. In the analytics team, we have system simulation, discrete event simulation modeling is one critical function that we handle. And then we have operation, like OR kind of tools where we do linear programming. So it's more like a prescriptive, right? What is the best combination? How do I manage my constraints? What is the best answer I can get? Tell me how and when I can, like load and run my, like products. And then prediction is where tell me, I don't know what's going to happen, what would be like the best lead time, what's my inventory. So it kind of falls in the prediction and prescription space. And the way we look at it is if you're getting into a particular supply chain that is coming in new, we try to understand how it is different from the existing, kind of mapping it out in terms of what the process flow is, and then putting an entire supply network. And it could be there are like multiple nodes in it. It may have different inputs and outputs and controls. We kind of understand what all go into it. And we also do the modeling at different layers of abstraction. We don't get to the nth level of detail because the question people we're trying to answer maybe at a higher level of, what are the revenue, or maybe what's the cost, versus not necessarily looking at what is the equipment utilization. So based on that, based on understanding what our stakeholders want to address and why, we look at what metrics we need to be measuring, and then we look at what data and systems and tools we have in place. Because if we can turn around and provide something quickly, we want to do that. If not, we look at our suite of tools that we have already delivered to see, can I convert that? Can I, do something so that I can give it to them? Because speed is critical for them. If not, we end up developing, and the way we develop this is more of a prototype to start with, because we want to develop something quickly, and it could be a simulation model. If it is, sometimes it could be as simple as a Monte Carlo simulation because they're only looking at the range variability, not necessarily
Right.
looking at the network. Or sometimes it could be as like as complex as give me an entire network. I need to
Mm,
be able to optimize my network. So before you optimize, you understand what your network look like. So that's the modeling. And then
right.
once we know what the network looks like, then the question that comes up is what if? What if I change my distribution point? Or what if I change my supply, like a network from this geo to the other geo? What would be the lead time look like? So that is a model that we do. And the next question is, what would be the best network solution if I have to hit my cost or hit my cycle time? That's the optimization we put on top of our models. And this is the process we, like we go through. We understand the process and map the network, do the simulation or what if, and then we optimize it.
Right. Great, great. That was a perfect overview and really aligns with what they've been learning, and also great to see it from Intel's perspective and how you guys do it on a daily basis. These are the tools that they're learning, and they can take directly with them to companies such as yourself. So, Saravan G has another good question, which is basically what are the skill sets required to be a future ready supply chain manager in the current scenario that we're in? How do you, she's asking a little bit, or excuse me, they are asking a little bit if, if you would recommend a master's in supply chain or an MBA or finance courses, or, how do they really prepare themselves for, being a future ready supply chain manager?
That's a great question again, and definitely having the inquisitiveness to ask right question would be fundamental, whether you're an undergrad, master, PhD, MBA, and knowing how the business runs, what are the critical things that matter is very important. Coming from a technical world in the past, I was more about, hey, my solution should solve the problems. It is not about the elegance of the solution that you should care for. It is the importance of business problem that you want to solve that you really need to care for. And how do I prepare for that? Number one, like understand things happening around you, and then like understand yourself in terms of what makes you click. What are the things that in your portfolio are really strong? What are the things in your portfolio that you would like to get at? If you have a target of, I want to be a very successful supply chain professional, whether it is like want to be a chief supply chain officer, or whether you want to be more in the analytics space or in the planning space, understand what and why it is critical, and then look at how different people, like there are successful people in that space, what made them successful. That is
Yeah,
important. And then looking at your portfolio of, okay, in fact, for data scientists, I created a model called a diamond model where you have to, a lot of people, data scientists, they come in with, I know clustering, I know Bayesian network, I can do operation research. But the other question I would ask them is, do you know how to pull data from a system? Do you know how to integrate different data systems to create a database? I mean, meaning, can you create a user interface? Because in this day and age, I'm not expecting that they need to be strong software engineers, but if you're waiting for someone to feed the data or write the algorithm, that's not going to work. So
sure.
understanding data systems, understanding, like coming with your strong algorithms and applications, where to apply what, and then the domain knowledge is critical. That is the third
Mm.
part, like a component in my, the diamond is your domain knowledge is critical. Like you may not be an expert, but try to understand how the integration happens. What are the critical metrics? And then, of course, the soft skills, asking, like whether it's a matter of networking with people, teamwork, communicating. So those are some of the critical things. You can gain this well, independent of what courses you're taking, but always when you're taking a class, how am I going to apply this? Like, I'm learning the strategy. How do I ensure that the strategy aspects are covering from a business perspective for different businesses? We go through the Porter's model and different things, like how do we apply it, application, and also what are the things that people normally do but they don't really get into the details? How can I differentiate myself, are some of the things I would look at.
Right. Oh, that's great. Great advice. I think one that many can internalize for kind of their strategies as they're going through these courses and the future. So this is actually one I know that you can speak perfectly to. So Adame 66 asks, big data analytics is becoming fundamental need in supply chain. And do you have an organizational design fully dedicated to gathering, analyzing, and improving decisions made, and then the types of tools you have in place? And I know this is squarely where you're working.
Maybe we should go to the slide that kind of referenced all the tools and systems. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and uh, call out the slide number, and then we can talk to slide number 6, if you will.
Great.
So the reason I put this together many years is the question that always comes up is, how do you apply analytics across supply chain effectively, and what are the different types of things that analytics can help in the supply chain? You can see that I don't think I spared anything else. Everything else is there, starting from demand to supply to manufacturing, including some ancillaries like construction. And on the left side, you have an arrow that points to what the industry broadly calls as the stages of analytics, going from descriptive diagnostics, predictive, prescriptive, and cognitive. And the question is, like there are different models that are tried out. One is centralized analytics team, the decentralized analytics team, but one that seems to be working now is what we call as the hybrid model. And if you were to go tell your functional your supply chain folks saying that, hey, I'm going to have an analytics team centralized that's going to provide all your day-to-day kind of metrics and everything, that would work, but the size and scale of that is going to be bigger. So where, at least from my perspective, what I'm looking at is, the descriptive and diagnostics part of analytics need to stay with the line of business, because whoever is working, like the planning person, a professional, the buyer, the commodity manager, like if you look at them, they have to know the data, they have to understand the business, they have to see what metrics are managed and how, like the things that are changing would impact one way or the other. That means ability to read your system and data and describe what is happening is critical. And if there is a problem, like for example, shipment did not make it, why? What are the challenges? The diagnostic part need to stay in the line of business. But when we start looking at predictive, prescriptive, and cognitive, you could go upskill the team, or that's where a kind of a centralized advanced analytics team, that's what I have, is helpful, because this is where you are building the solution, not just a point solution, but you're building it across your supply chain organization. You need to connect the dots. You need to be able to build it once and use it many times. And also the techniques and technology you're going to be using is much more advanced. I have now several PhD data scientists. I have several PhD operation research engineers who are very comfortable and very adept at knowing what to use, how to program, and how to leverage it across the board. So to me, having the like a buy kind of a thinking in terms of descriptive diagnostics, I want to embed it within the line of business. The rest of them, advanced. I need to make sure that we have a center of excellence that it can be leveraged. Is how we have built a team.
Great, great. That was a wonderful perspective and really shows how you guys have really embedded it in the organization very comprehensively. So we're coming down to the last 5 minutes. I'm going to take one more student question and then we're going to wrap it up because we know that you have a very busy schedule. So M. Salieri actually wants to know, which is very aligned with the course, what are the main communication challenges does Intel face across its supply chain teams and geographies around the world as you have already discussed how huge Intel is and how global you are. How do you grapple with those challenges?
That's again a great question because Intel is spread worldwide, and we have what's called as the follow the sun kind of a process. And the communication, I think a couple of things. One is our leaders are very good at communicating on a timely fashion. And also it's not just the emails, but we also have blogs, so that it is about not only one way, but it is it has to be both ways. The blogs kind of help people to provide their inputs, and in fact we're using that in many cases in projects also, so that it is not a push, it's a push pull. And how do we do better, like it's not just emails or something, but we also leverage the video communication, like we use the meetings, some of the critical meetings. It's always good to have eye to eye, so we leverage that. And we also make sure that just because someone is in Asia, they don't get the brunt of staying over like late nights to attend the meetings. We make sure that the meetings are scheduled that is somewhat friendly across like different geos. And also making sure that the like we're following a disciplined approach to communications and meeting in terms of, hey, communicate timely, communicate what is needed, don't speculate, and then ensure that there is an opportunity for people to do a two-directional communication, some of the things we look at. And we also have on a regular basis our leaders, we have like quarterly updates, and that is across the geo. And then the people who are locally, the leaders who they do that so that they get to talk. And then in terms of business and systems, we also have updates on a regular basis. So it seems to be
Great.
working for us.
Great. And I also like the follow the sun mentality or phrasing that makes very clear. But no, that's great because that's one of the issues that we discuss heavily in supply chain dynamics is, getting your global teams on board. So that was wonderful. So we have just a few more minutes. So sort of final words for our our SEX MicroMasters learners. Any future advice you have for someone who has such a depth of experience in supply chain? Any inspirational thoughts as we leave you today?
Alexis, I can tell you that we are living in an exciting time right now. It is, like some people might say that it is, Industry 4.0 is revolutionizing the compute capability, the ability for people to connect and leverage things. The learning aspects have improved quite well. I think the knowledge worker is where the future is going. Like it's not just about learning things, but also sharing, understanding technology, leveraging things, and applying it in a timely fashion are all critical aspects. I strongly believe that like the MIT, the students have the best advantage of learning from experts and understanding not just the getting really good at technical, but also understanding the business world and applying it. And I'm sure they're already future ready. but keep an eye always out for what's happening, how things are changing. And sometimes things are so overwhelming that you just hunker down and focus on your stuff, but always look at what are the other external things that are going to change. What is the next thing that is going to revolutionize? Like, for example, if someone was preparing to be a truck driver, for example, all the indications are autonomous driving would be focusing on trucks, like so. And the same thing with the technology, like it's, don't be faced by, is technology going to phase me out, like how can I leverage what is coming next so that I'm ready for it, is something that I
Great.
would look for.
Great. That was great advice, and that's something I think that our students will absolutely internalize as they move forward in their supply chain careers. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been really eye-opening, really great insight into breadth of supply chain experience as well as intel and global operations. Thank you for joining us. To all the students, thank you for coming. And there were so many great questions. We didn't get to all of them. Hopefully, you got some insight today. And to everyone, thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Manny.
You're welcome. Thank you.